Hello fellow sim racers. Today I'm taking a look at the Assetto Corsa Legends Prototype mod by Bazza and Smallblock Hero. I make no secret of the fact that I have a preference for older race cars, and while I have a deep respect for the modern carbon fibre guided missiles that regularly obliterate lap records, I just don't quite feel the same connection to them. To me, today's Le Mans prototypes, Formula and GT cars are tools, weapons even, while the cars of the past seem to have more than just utilitarian value. So, with my nostalgia goggles set to their rosiest tint, let's dive in and take a look at the Assetto Corsa Prototype Legends mod. Smallblock Hero and Bazza have cobbled together a collection of 60s and 70s sports cars from a number of sources, converted and updated them for Assetto Corsa. Some of you will know the history of some of these car models far better than I do, so I won't go into that here, but it's important to look at this mod in context. Some of these models are, well, fairly old now, and while the creators have done an excellent job of converting and updating them, there are some areas where they do lack a little bit of fidelity compared to modern offerings. So with that caveat out of the way, let's move on. The mod contains 9 legendary sports prototypes from the 60s and 70s, including the Chaparral 2E, Ferrari 312 PB, the Ferrari 330 P4, the Ford GT40 MK4, Lola T70 MK3, the Lola T290, and the Mclaren M1B and M8C Can-Am cars, and everybody's favourite, the Porsche 917K. The Prototypes pack is part of the wider AC Legends mod, with the other pack containing a collection of GT and touring cars, but I'll be covering those in another video. If you've got all of the Kunos DLC, you'll notice that there is some replication here. As excellent versions of the Ferrari 330 P4 and the Porsche 917K are now available from Kunos, I'm going to focus on the unique content in this pack. However, the GT40 MK4 is different enough from the Mark I version to warrant further discussion. Let's start off with what is arguably the most innovative car in the pack. The Chaparral, with its high rear wing, side-mounted radiators and ducted nose aero, was well ahead of its time. To put it into context, this car was introduced in the same year as the Datsun Sunny. As you would expect, the Chaparral has quite a lot of rear grip, and for my liking, the balance is biased a little too much towards the rear. But with that giant barn door wing, that seems fairly plausible to me. What this means in practice is that the rear end of the Chaparral is pretty stable, particularly at high speed, but on the stock setup at least, the front end requires quite a bit of persuasion on turning, so managing weight transfer is especially important. This is a car that feels fast, particularly in the high speed stuff where the aero switches on, but braking distances are fairly long, though at only 740 kilos it does stop quite a lot quicker than some of the more husky cars in the pack, like the GT40. With only 3 very long gears, it's quite easy to find yourself in the wrong part of the rev range, and you're going to end up looking for the 4th gear that's just not there. But all in all, the Chaparral is a great fun car to drive, but it's not without its challenges. In the early 1970s, racing sports car manufacturers trended towards smaller, more agile cars, somewhat prompted by the regulatory shift away from 5-litre engines. The Ferrari 312 PB arguably had more in common with the F1 cars of the day than with the likes of the 330 and 512 it replaced. With an aero-focused monocoque chassis, 5-speed gearbox and ventilated disc brakes, the contrast to its predecessors is stark. And that carries over to the in-game version very nicely indeed. After driving something like the GT40, which handles a little bit like HMS Ark Royal, the 312 PB is a breath of fresh air. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that this is one of the standout cars in the pack. The 312 is poised and nimble, and it feels a lot more modern than the 1960s beast that preceded it. However, it doesn't have masses of downforce, and the balance between so-called mechanical and aerodynamic grip feels very good to me. What that all means in practice is that the car responds very well to direction change, and generally goes where you ask it. You do need a gentle right foot though, as 460 horses combined with 1970s tyre technology to produce a rear end that would really rather be at the front of the car. The 312 PB is a real blast to drive, and it's probably the car I've spent most time driving from the pack. That being said, there are a couple of areas that could probably be improved. Some of the textures in the cockpit are pretty basic, particularly around the dash, and the sound is, well, it's not bad, but but it's a little lacking compared to some of the other cars in the pack. Continuing the theme of early 70s prototypes, the Lola T290 was a popular choice in the 2-litre category of the day, while sharing the track with the likes of the Ferrari 312s, Alfa T33s and Porsche 908 Spyders that were mainstays of the 3-litre class. Like the 312 PB, the Lola is a very light and nimble car, and with 200 fewer ponies trying to break free, it's a lot easier to manage for those of us with lead feet. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the T290 is an excellent introduction to driving older racing cars in Assetto Corsa, as frankly it's fairly forgiving. All in all, the T290 is a very manageable car and an enjoyable experience to drive. It does lack some of the danger factor of some of the other prototypes though, which is not always a bad thing. The only real issue as I can see is there's not a lot to race it against in the same 2-litre class other than, well, more Lolas. The GT40 is a car that needs no introduction, but the variation between the various models is a little less well known. Ford and Shelby won at Le Mans in '66 with a Mark II, and in '67 with the Mark IV that's represented in this mod. But confusingly, the car that won the 24 Hours in '68 and '69 was a rebuilt Mark I model, and that's the car that Kunos produced for the game. The biggest difference between the Mark IV that we're taking a look at here and the Mark I from Kunos is around 100 horsepower, the Mark IV being blessed with a colossal 7-litre V8, while regulation change forced Ford to downsize for their '68 and '69 campaigns. Aerodynamically, the Mark IV was a much refined machine as well, its sleek lines bearing little resemblance to the earlier model. The most obvious change in this area is a redesigned nose and tail section, designed to counteract the minor issue of front-end lift at high speed. Driving the car in Assetto Corsa is, broadly speaking, a pretty similar experience to the Kunos version, and the most obvious handling quirk also carries over as well. When I say quirk, I mean the famously extensive stopping distances, which should really be measured in furlongs. And that's a pretty scary thing in a car capable of 220 miles per hour. But it's important to remember that the GT40 was a heavy old beast, weighing about the same as 2 of the Lola T290s we just looked at. Moving on, the car sounds really good to my ears and the model is very well detailed. Arguably, some of the interior textures are a little more basic than we're used to these days, but it doesn't really detract from the overall effect. As a final thought, the GT40 Mark IV makes a useful addition to the late 60s sports car field. When combined with the other GT40, the 330p, Porsche 908 and the Lola T70 from this pack, we have 5 of the major players from the era, which by sim racing standards is pretty damn decent if you ask me. By way of a poorly constructed segue, we move on to take a look at the second Lola car in the pack, the T70 Mark III. Like the T290, the T70 was a hugely popular customer car, and they seem to turn up just about everywhere, as they still do today at historic meets. The car's main claim to fame was a win at Daytona in '69 by a car entered by none other than Roger Penske, but the T70's also achieved significant success at national level competition as well. As for the in-game representation, I love it. It's very much the yin to the GT40's yang. The T70 is lighter, more agile, and has a reasonable amount of downforce for a car of its day. That all translates to a car that stops quicker, turns in better, and corners faster than its rivals. This is a car that I instantly bonded with. Everything about it just makes sense to me. The force feedback's great, it sounds fantastic, and the driving dynamics are spot on in my opinion. In common with its contemporaries, you do need a delicate right foot, as the small block Chevy has literally all of the torque. And the front end is a bit sensitive to inappropriate weight transfer. But all things considered, I think this is a great car. The final 2 cars in the pack are a pair of McLarens synonymous with the Canadian-American Challenge Cup. The M1B was raced by the McLaren Works team in the inaugural Can-Am season in 1966, but McLaren also sold dozens of customer cars, produced in conjunction with Elva as the McLaren Elva Mark II, which ensured they were a staple of Can-Am and USRRC grids at the time. The in-game version has the later 6-litre Chevrolet V8, producing the better part of 600 brake horsepower. And since the car weighs in at under 600 kilos, it has a power-to-weight ratio that beats the Formula 1 cars of the day. What this all translates into is a car that's immeasurably fun to drive. Often the most important statistic is how many smiles per mile a car generates, and the M1B, for me at least, creates significant facial pain for the near permanent grin that driving it produces. With so much power on tap, you're encouraged to power slide everywhere, whether you want to or not. Thankfully, the front end is pretty compliant if you manage the weight on the front tyres correctly, and like any good drift machine, you steer the rear of the car using your right foot. And while all this is happening, you're treated to one hell of a soundtrack. One final note on handling, the stock setup is incredibly soft, which is quite disconcerting, but it does seem to work. Throughout this video, I've made comment that perhaps some of the interior textures in the cars are a bit lacking in fidelity. The M1B, however, has no such issues in this regard. All in all, this is a great little car. McLaren entered the following Can-Am season in '67 with the M6A and utterly dominated. In '68 they brought the aggressive looking M8A and, well, dominated again. And McLaren's reign continued until Porsche turned up with the 917 variants in the early '70s, and we all know how that story went. The M8C, as featured in the Assetto Corsa Legends Prototype pack, was developed as a customer version, and 15 chassis were sold to a variety of privateers. In-game, the car is that terrifying combination of hellishly fast and slightly unpredictable, at least on the stock setup. And I have to admit, I haven't spent all that much time tweaking it, instead sort of just driving around the problems, which is much more fun if not all that effective. When the aero switches on, this car is a real monster through fast corners, but out of the box it's pretty clumsy feeling in the slow stuff. I'm sure some of those issues could be dialed out with some simple setup tweaks though. Moving on, when compared back to back with the fantastic sounding M1B, the M8C sounds a little bit thin and nasal, which is a bit of a shame really. That being said, it's no worse than some of the stock Kunos cars. All in all, the McLaren M8C shows quite a lot of promise, but it's not quite there straight out of the box. If you're willing to put the time in to get the setup right, I'm sure it can be made into a real peach. So, having had a rundown of the cars in the Assetto Corsa Legends Prototype pack individually, I'd like to sum up with a few words about the pack as a whole. In the opening segment of the video, I prefaced my comments by suggesting that this mod needs to be looked at in context. These cars are conversions from other sources, and in some cases, they're of a fair old vintage. Smallblock Hero and Bazza have done the community a huge favour by converting, refining and tweaking these cars so we can race them in Assetto Corsa, and I for one am very thankful for that. Now, the cars aren't perfect, and some may disagree with some of the decisions the guys have made regarding specific cars' handling. But from my point of view, I think they're brilliant. And I guess you could argue that to have an imperfect representation of a car is better than none at all. But I think that mentality would be selling the creators a little bit short. These cars are an important addition to Assetto Corsa for those of us that have an eye on the past, and I'm pretty thankful that we have access to them. Moving on, generally the cars perform fairly well against the stock Kunos content. However, I have found that depending on the combination, you may have to employ some sort of balance of performance measures to get everything to play well together. This is dead easy if you use an alternate launcher like Content Manager, as you can easily add ballast or restrictor values to a car and save it in a custom grid so you don't have to do it again next time. I think those of us that like to race older cars mostly appreciate that we're at the edge of the bell curve. And in general, we're usually pretty happy when we get any content whatsoever that fits our little niche. So, my view of the Assetto Legends Prototype pack is overwhelmingly positive. It's great to have some of these iconic 60s and 70s cars that were notably absent from the game. And combined with Kunos' excellent GT40, 330p4, 908 and 917K, we end up with a pretty decent selection representing sports car racing of the period. And for me at least, that's a wonderful thing. So that about wraps things up here. As usual, if you're interested in this pack, I've put a download link in the description. I'll be taking a look at the Assetto Corsa GT Legends pack from the same source in a future video, so keep an eye out for that. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you've got any suggestions for content you'd like to see on the channel in future, then please let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for donating your precious time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.